So, what is a definition of ethics? And I like to think of ethics as a continuum between thinking only of self versus thinking of others, right? So, there's this ethical continuum. And at one end of the spectrum, you're only thinking of yourself. And at the other end of the spectrum, you're only thinking of others. And this continuum can be like at one end of the spectrum, I'm only thinking of self at the exclusion of everybody else. So at this end of the spectrum where I'm only thinking of myself, I'm willing, if I see like, oh, or, somebody at this end of the spectrum, if they see like, oh, I really like your watch, they will kill you for your watch. They don't care. They're only thinking of themselves. They have no regard for anybody else. They don't think of others. They're only thinking of self. They want your watch. They'll kill you for it. It doesn't even faze them. So somebody who's completely self-absorbed, not thinking of anybody else at all, sociopathic or antisocial disorder, personality disorder over at this end of the spectrum. That's one end of the spectrum. Here's the other end of the spectrum. So at this end of the spectrum, you're thinking of self at the exclusion of others. At this end of the spectrum, you're thinking of others at the exclusion of self. So you're not even really thinking of self at all, right? And you're really focused upon others. And so people out here on this end of the spectrum are like, yeah, you know what? I may die, but I'm willing to die for the greater good, for all of humanity, for the cause. So soldiers, police people, fire people, right? 9/11, the firemen running into the building, right? They're like, well, there are people up there. It's my job. I'm going to try to save them. They are thinking of others at the exclusion of self, right? So those are some practical examples: firemen, policemen, soldiers, right? And those aren't completely pure examples. Those are a little bit gray because it really depends upon the individual and what they're doing. Obviously, there's instances of soldiers probably not thinking of others, right? Because war is really kind of about not thinking about others when you think about it. Because if you were thinking about others, how could you really shoot somebody? And that's actually one of the things they do when you go through military training is they want to dehumanize the enemy, and they dehumanize them so you don't think of them as humans, and that you can easily kill and those people and put in whatever derogatory comment for describing enemies that you want, right? But soldiers often have really derogatory ways of thinking about their enemies that dehumanize them so that it's easier to kill them so that they're not thinking of others. All right, but two ends of the spectrum. At this end of the spectrum, the purest ones would be like Jesus or Buddha or Gandhi or Martin Luther King, right? Where it's like, look, you can take my life, but I'm willing to die for others, and that's okay. So two spectrums here, two spectrums. One spectrum, two ends to the spectrum. Thinking only of self at the exclusion of others, right? So I don't care at all about others. I'm only thinking of myself. And thinking only of others at the exclusion of self. So I don't care what happens to me. I'm thinking of others, and I'm willing to die for the cause. So let me graphically give you that picture here. So here's the continuum of thinking, continuum between thinking of self versus thinking of others. And so here, only thinking of self. I don't like Jewish people. Put them on a train, pack them away, kill them, burn them up. Right? That's not really thinking of others. And the other end of the spectrum, right, would be like, I'm willing to die for the cause. I'm willing to put myself in harm's way for the benefit of other people. And here, in fact, is a quote by Martin Luther King: life's most persistent and urgent question is, what are you doing for others? So this is the ethical spectrum, right? The ethical spectrum, where we have two poles, only thinking of self and at one end, and only thinking of others at the other. And so this is a continuum, a spectrum, and all of us fall somewhere on this spectrum, and we all fall in different places at different times on this spectrum. So throughout our life, we will move on this spectrum, and hopefully we have a general trend throughout our life where we move from real self-orientation to real other orientation. And that's healthy, ethical, moral development through your life, right? Where when a baby's just born, their needs need to be met, and they tell you their needs need to be met. So it's not an antisocial, sociopathic kind of perspective. It's just natural human development. But if you get older, if you haven't moved away from that sort of self-oriented thinking to other-oriented thinking, you haven't been progressing on the continuum, the ethical continuum of moral development. And then also at various times, like, I might be here and I might do something where I'm thinking of others, And then I might, need to get a parking place on campus. And it's like, I race ahead of somebody somehow. And I grab a parking place where if I'd really been thinking of the other person, right, we both came to it at the same time, I grabbed it, right? Whereas if I was thinking of the other person, I would have given it to them. I would have been more out here. But instead, I was just thinking of myself and taking it for myself. So I made a decision which was more down here, right? So we all are somewhere on the spectrum, and we're always moving on the spectrum. And we can make decisions about how we behave. Are we behaving in a pro-social matter, where a pro-social orientation, where we're thinking of others? Or are we behaving in an antisocial, right? Antisocial personality disorder, antisocial behavior, where we're only thinking of self. So if we got far enough down here, we would be behaving in an antisocial disorder. So that leads us to looking a little bit at, so here's just a few more images for people who are only thinking of themselves. So here we have Hitler, Stalin, that is Charles Manson, and here is Pol Pot, right? And throughout the history of humanity, there have been all kinds of instances of, human genocides, people killing other people, war. Cambodia, never again. The Holocaust, never again. Bosnia, never again. Rwanda, never again. Darfur, right? Ukraine, Nanking, Armenia, right? Just all kinds of instances of humans not thinking of others, because if they were thinking of others, they wouldn't be killing them or dehumanizing them or thinking of them as, whatever negative derogative term and getting rid of them. And then over on this end of the spectrum, we've got Buddha, Martin Luther King, Gandhi, Jesus. And so we have these figures over here on this side of the spectrum thinking of others. And yes, that is a black Jesus. I actually like the black Jesus. I think he looks way cool. That's awesome. So that leads us, this theory of thinking about morals and ethics as a spectrum, as a continuum, where you're really self-focused on one end and really other-focused on the other end, leads us, it's not just my own personal theory, though. That is my way of describing it. There's a famous sociologist, psychologist or something, who came up with the same theory, but he called it Kohlberg's theory of moral development. And so we're going to talk about Kohlberg's theory of moral development and how he described this spectrum of self-orientation, other orientation, this ethical spectrum or moral spectrum, self, other orientation. We're going to talk about that in the next video.